Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for the Men's Club event for February. Tonight, I'm very excited to present or have Dr. Alec Feinberg presenting the alternate solution to global warming. To give him a little bit of an introduction, Alex received his PhD in physics from Northeastern University. He's worked for over 35 years in the engineering, physics-related disciplines in electronics and mechanical product assurance industry. He's currently semi-retired, and I have a feeling that means more than 20 hours a week, but still teaches classes in this area. About 2 years ago, he decided to do volunteer research work on the alternate solution to global warming. He recently published on this subject with a peer-reviewed research article in Springer Nature Applied Science. He currently has 3 additional papers in peer review. Alec and his wife, Linda, enjoy Templeton art classes and the opportunity for Alec to play the harmonica with the music group during the 2019 Beatles Purim Sing-Along. Alex has expressed to me that he's very excited to provide tonight's presentation. And with that, I would turn it over to Alec and let him go through his work. One of the things I want to ask everybody, if you have a question during Alex's presentation, please type your question in the chat. At the conclusion of the presentation, we will go through, Alec will have a chance to go through those questions and answer those that he wants to. All right.
Okay, well, thanks, John. And I want to thank Rabbi Michael Stevens for inviting me to do this. So let me start, I guess, right in. If you can also check out the slide numbers. So if you have a question, you could write down the slide number that you want to go to. Okay, and I think the talk's going to be posted as well as if you need the slides, you can give me a shout at that email address down below there. Okay, so an outline. We're going to start off with climate change indicators, and then we're going to talk about what is the alternate solution to global warming. Then some proposed solutions, a better understanding of greenhouse gas and reflectivity solutions. Talk about nature's feedback, and then I'm going to talk about my research papers and my contributions, and then I'm going to summarize. Okay, so we'll start off with climate change indicators. So how do we know that climate change is occurring? So it's not logical to just trust one data set. So we look at surface thermometers, and they're showing, I pretty much study the period between 1950 and 2019. And so most of all my work is for that period. There's a 1 degree rise roughly in that time frame. We also have satellite support data, ocean heat observations, increases, atmospheric temperature, ice melting issues, and sea level rising. So there's a lot of sources there, and there's a lot of organizations that are mapping global warming, and they all are corresponding, as you can see here on the graph, that we have close to a 1 degree rise that has occurred over the since 1950. And a lot of people use the baseline 1950 as a sort of reference. So sometimes people look at that as a reference, and I certainly use it. Now, how do we know global warming is caused by man? I know at least 5-10 years ago, there was a lot of people disbelieving that. So a lot of people point to this, what's called this hockey stick graph. And so the hockey stick graph, you can Google that. And it kind of shows the natural temperature rise that they somehow surmise from ice formation information. And at the end here, so this goes back 20,000 years, and you can see the current day, the spike. So that's very unnatural. And because it's unnatural, that is the main issue. Okay. So let's look at what is the alternate solution to global warming. So there are no, I'll start off by saying there are no easy solutions to global warming. However, there are feasible solutions. So knowledge and efficient actions are key. And I think there is a need for a centralized global funding that could help solve the problem. And I don't feel that they have that, especially for the alternate solution. So there are two man-made causes of global warming, and there's two main solutions to global warming. Now, most of us are sort of geared to thinking that 99% of global warming is caused by CO2, but that's likely not true. So the two main causes that I have been looking at is greenhouse gas increases since 1950, and also reflectivity changes due to urban heat islands. And that's what I published on. So my estimate was that about 33% of global warming was due to urban heat islands and about 67% greenhouse gases. So I'm not alone in that estimate. There's even more aggressive estimates than that. So now greenhouse gases, a little education while we talk about things. Greenhouse gases are like blankets on your bed. So too many of them and you have too much warming. So there's a little area here where you can sort of see that some of the warmth escapes into outer space and some of it is re-radiated back by the greenhouse gases. Now, down below, you can see some of the issue related to urban heat islands, where you can see the thermal imaging from the city and the heat that is generated from that. So there's obviously something that's going on with that. Now, because there's two main problems, there's two main solutions to global warming: reduction of greenhouse gases, as we all know, and increasing the reflectivity of the Earth. Okay, so over on the left here, you can see the carbon dioxide, methane, which are the main players for greenhouse gases. Now, when you talk about changes, so basically if we talk about global warming since 1950, you ask, well, what are the changes that have occurred? And the changes is what mankind is doing, is an increase in the greenhouse gases, as well as a change in the reflectivity of the planet. So those are the two main changes that are occurring. So it's not rocket science. If it's hot, it's contributing to global warming. So cooling hotspots is a good goal. And greenhouse gases need heat to work. So the less hotspot heat means the less greenhouse gas re-radiation. So you should think about hotspots as a kind of activation for greenhouse gases. So they're not independent. And hotspots are actually, the planet emits what they call long wavelength radiation, which is infrared radiation. And that's what is re-radiated by the greenhouse gases. So in terms of arguments for the reflectivity solution, it seems like the whole world is focused on CO2 solutions, but the reality is the reflectivity solution is much faster. It's immediate. And it's a factor of 1.6 more reflective, and we'll talk about that, more effective rather. Currently, it's the only realistic method to reverse global warming. Now, CO2 goals are actually focusing on reducing the trend, but not reversing global warming. I mean, they would like to do that if they could eliminate it. But part of the problem is that CO2 lingers for 300 to 1,000 years. And so it has a half-life, what they call a half-life of 100 years. So CO2 emissions can be reduced by greener methods, more forest farms, and and a thing called carbon capture. So I'll talk a little bit about that and to see what can be done. So, this is sort of my opinion. It doesn't mean that there may be others that feel that CO2 can reverse, reduction in CO2 can reverse global warming. It's just that I don't feel comfortable saying that they have that, like carbon capture and some of the methods, we're falling far behind in that area. And so right now, CO2 reduction is not winning, but there are some good results. And there's a big debate on how much CO2 is causing global warming. There's been some pushback in some of the scientists. And I'll talk about that. And I have some information that I don't feel that is as strong as they say it is. And I wrote a paper on it, and I'm trying to find, try to get that peer reviewed. Obviously, in my opinion, if you don't get a peer review, it's not really accepted. So I'll see what I can do with that. Now, let's look at what some of the other authors are saying about the albedo solution so we can put it in perspective. When I say the albedo solution, albedo is another name for the reflectivity solution. Albedo is a scale for the percent reflective. For example, ice can be like 80% reflective, but the ocean is only about 5% reflective. So this graph is a projection by these authors down here, McMahon and Dunn. And you can see that some of the graph is present day down here, 1950 to 2000, we have that 1 degree rise. And so if we did business as usual, you can see that we would actually be in a lot of trouble. Now, some CO2 mitigation is shown in this line here. And if we can get to a point with carbon capture where we can actually remove it, we can do some reversal that way. But according to these authors, they feel that the albedo solution or the reflectivity solution is immediate. And they think that might kick in somewhere when we start getting desperate for it. I'm not sure when that would be, but I also added this dash line because I think it reverses global warming. It has that capability. So hopefully you can understand that chart. Okay, so when we talk about the reflectivity solution, how much reflection do we have to increase on the planet? So here's a pretty good graph. It shows you that the scattering in the air reflects about 6% of the sun. The clouds reflect about 17%. The Earth's surface is about 7%. So that means about 47% is absorbed on the surface, and 23% is absorbed in the clouds in the atmosphere. So basically, the planet is about 30% reflective. Now, if we can increase the reflectivity of the Earth by about 0.44%, so a little bit less absorption here and a little bit more reflection off the surface, that would solve global warming, or that should be a completely reversal. And and there's agreement on that by climatologists. Now, how can we increase the reflectivity of the Earth? So it's not an easy job. And I'm going to talk about some of the methods that have been proposed and some of the things that are ongoing. But for the most part, there's not a lot of activity that I feel that there's not enough activity. So there's cool roofs, cool roads, cool cities. I'll talk a little bit about Death Valley, California, because I had some idea to see what you guys think of it for cooling off that. And why would that help? I think it would help solve a lot of the drought problems in that area. But would it help global warming? Probably not much. There's an Alaska ice project. formerly called ICE 911. You can sort of look at that. There's a desert modification and sun shading. Those are the ones I want to talk about. And there's other solutions like ocean foaming, more reflective clouds, aerosol sprays. There's been a lot of both surface and atmospheric solutions that have been proposed. But in my opinion, there's not enough activity. That's the problem. So what is a cool roof? So we're all familiar with, most of us have black roofs, and it's, you know, we're just not made aware that it would be a good practice to have a white roof. And you can see that a lot of parts of the world are using, especially the hot areas of the world, are using white to cool off cities. And it's obvious, but it's not really mainstream obvious in terms of global warming. And you can see here on the left here, you can see the dark roofs, this infrared picture, and you can see the light colored cars versus the dark colored cars that are absorbing the sun and the road. And then you can see the rooftops that are, or the shaded areas where the sun's not hitting. So cool roofs are white roofs, and there's other roofs that are, people are planting and planting shrubs and things on their roof. And that increases the reflectivity and as well provides some natural cooling because of the rain. And one thing the cities are void of is that they actually, when it rains, it causes a lot of evaporation kind of too fast. So they've lost the natural cooling. So it's a good practice, white roofs. And there's been some actual pushback on that because people say, well, if you have a dark colored roof during the winter, you won't need as much heat. So you won't have as much CO2. So there's always pushback. And I'm somewhat disagreeing with that, but for the most part, certainly in hot areas, there's no reason not to have white roofs. And I think North Carolina actually is an area that is, you know, eligible for lighter colored roofs. Cool roads, there's been some effort in Los Angeles for cooling off neighborhoods with cool roads by painting them white. So there's definitely activities, but most of them are for health reasons. People don't view that this is a powerful enough method to reduce global warming because of the area requirements that you need to cool off, that you need to paint white. Now, it's just that we don't pay attention to colors. We have black Tesla cars, black roads, and roofs. And here we have one of the foremost car companies in the world that are making black and, you know, all color cars, of course, Tesla. But the point is that there's no rhyme or reason to have a black car. And although the area that is, you know, taken up by cars is not relatively significant to cause global cooling, there's a reason for it other than that. So let's look at that. When you have a gasoline car sitting in a parking lot that's white, its temperature is about, you know, 50 degrees cooler than a black Tesla car. So this is contributing, in theory, more to global warming than a gas car just sitting in a parking lot. So it's just a concept. So it's not rocket science. If it's hot, it's contributing to global warming. Now, there's other reasons. I mean, you know, we have to be conscious of colors. There's, for air conditioning on your car, they estimate that about 2% of fuel savings would occur because there's about 1 billion cars on the road. So certainly there's reason for Tesla to be smarter. And you have one of the smartest engineered companies in the world producing the wrong color of cars. So it's just an indication, I'm trying to point out, that not even Tesla seems to be aware that reflectivity is an important issue on the planet. And it's just not advertised, and the awareness is not there. So it's disappointing from that perspective. And I think part of the reason is that climatologists have, in my opinion, not done a good job in this area. And so it brings their A+ grade down to somewhere around C- overall. That's my opinion. But okay, so let's look at some proposed reflectivity solutions of what has gone on. So one of the most expensive solutions is sun shading in outer space. So this is an article by Sanchez, and we have a space mirror here, and he estimates that the mirror radius would have to be about 340 miles. So that's a pretty large disk area. And that would cast a shadow that he's saying on the Earth. It looks like a radius of about 8,000 kilometers. So I wasn't in complete agreement with it. I thought that this was too large a mirror and that he doesn't need that much area. But nevertheless, it's one of the proposed solutions to have these space mirrors in outer space. And I think it's, something that NASA at least should be investigating. I'm a big proponent that NASA should be more involved in global warming. I don't think they're enough involved in it. And I'll explain that a little bit. We really need their engineering. So there's two desert solutions that I found in the literature, and I think that are noteworthy. The first one was by this author here, Gaskell, proposed that converting desert with reflective polyurethane aluminum type of surface granules, I guess, to increase the reflectivity from 36 to 80%. And of course, that would need a lot of maintenance. And he was trying to get about 2% coverage. Now, the good thing about deserts, the thing I like about deserts, is kind of like a wasteland. And it's not really, it's an area that one could pick on because it's so available, and it could be converted in a number of ways. You can make it more reflective. You can try to irrigate it in some way and convert it and make it in a creative way to make it more useful and more reflective farmland. And there are people that have thought that way. In 2008, from a Japanese person, Toyama. Okay, so I should mention that the reflectivity solution for the desert would require about $2 trillion a year of maintenance, because it's not one of those surfaces that is easily maintained. Now, this man thought that we could actually reverse global warming with his other authors in 2008 with reflective sheets. And he thought, I'm not sure, I wasn't able to read his paper because it's not open access, but the abstract alluded to about 60,000 square kilometers and about $280 billion. And so I thought, well, there's a pretty good proposal, reflective sheets. And so I'm not 100%, knowing what happened to that. I tried to research it and find, is anything going on with that? And to tell you the truth, I haven't been able to find out more information in that area. So I'm sorry I can't report on that. The good thing about deserts is that they're typically not cloud covered. They're about 90% sunlight. So that's a big issue because you have a high irradiance, and a lot of the area on the planet is covered by clouds. About 47% of the planet is illuminated on average. And I think I showed you that earlier. So there's an Arctic ice project that I thought had a lot of merit. Now this is ongoing and this is active. And they're trying to increase the ice because a lot of us are knowledgeable that the ice is melting in the Arctic. And so their strategy is to come up with these very small hollow glass microspheres. And what they want to do is sprinkle it on the young ice. So there's a difference between old ice and young ice. The old ice is 80% reflective, but the young ice is only 30% reflective. So if you can sprinkle it on the young ice, they feel that you could increase the reflectivity, and that would give it the chance of the young ice to become old ice, and that would be helpful. Now, that project looks like it's severely underfunded, as far as I can tell. So that's part of the problem, is that there's so much emphasis on CO2, and there's not enough emphasis on what is, the reflectivity solution. Okay, I thought I'd have a section on a better understanding of greenhouse gases and the reflectivity solution. So a lot of people that have looked at global warming have seen this chart here. And you can see that people say, well, look at that. Global warming is, which is the red line here, from early 1900 all the way up to current day. And the increase in CO2 are they follow each other, what they call correlated. Well, then that must be the reason for global warming. So, while that chart is a necessary condition, it's certainly not sufficient. And if you go down here and you look at urban heat islands and the materials that are used for manufacturing urban heat islands, the material usage has followed global warming. In fact, global warming basically follows the population increase. So you can make a chart that global warming follows the sale of t-shirts. So it's, like I said, it's a necessary chart, but it's not a sufficient condition. So you should be a little skeptical when you see people using this argument. It's not, a full argument. Now, greenhouse gases, as a chart from 2014, I thought it was pretty good breakdown. It's probably still reasonable. So we got about 65. This is the increase of what greenhouse gases contribute proportionally. So you have 65% from fossil fuels, and you have about 11% from other sources. Forestry changes like forest fires, different other sources. Methane is a big problem that people are saying are 30 to 80 times. Well, they use like a 20-year average. They feel that methane is 80 times more potent than carbon monoxide, but fortunately there's not as much of it as carbon dioxide. But they're releasing a lot of methane. We're releasing a lot of methane from different sources, primarily in the Arctic. They're concerned as the ice melts, there's trapped methane. Now, I'd like to make you feel a little bit better. At the end of the presentation, I have a reason to believe that methane is only half as potent as carbon dioxide. And I'll explain that. And along with the fact that I think carbon dioxide is only half as potent than they say it is. So that's some of my research that I'm trying to get published. Okay, let's look at some of the progress in the last year, because that's kind of a good, important indicator in some ways. Of course, we had the pandemic, so that automatically means that we're using less greenhouse gas. And if you can look at that up here, you can see the trend since 2016. So I modeled that, and I see about a slope of about 2.35 parts per million per year, and others have estimated about 2.5 parts per million a year has been the trend. But in the last year, we're only seeing about 1.9 parts per million. So about a 25% reduction. So we made a little progress, but you can still see that it's increasing. So not enough progress. We need to get to net zero increase. So that's part of the problem. So it's just a little indication there. Carbon capture, there's been a lot of discussion and work on that for getting clean energy. And basically, the idea is that you kind of try to use renewable energy. So you're not actually, it costs electricity to scrub and clean fossil fuel that is being emitted. And the best place to capture carbon is at the source. It's hard to just clean the atmosphere, as you can imagine. And once you capture it by scrubbing, you can store it, and there's some ability to reuse it and recycle it into more fuel. So there's some ability to do that. So that's the carbon capture kind of way of looking at things. And of course, the best way to, as I mentioned, to reduce carbon capture is at the source for cleaning coal. However, there's a 20 to 30% cost increase that you have to provide electricity, which has to be renewable electricity, because if it's not renewable electricity, then you are creating more fossil fuel, and your ability to clean becomes less efficient. Forests are really our best natural resource for removing carbon dioxide, trees, and some of that we're losing the battle because of drought and forest fires. Farms can store a lot of carbon in the plants and things like that. They can plant fields during the off season or try to have more robust planting. Scientists are trying to develop crops that are more resistant to drought and deposit more carbon in the soils. So the best way to reduce carbon, though, is with wind, solar, and nuclear energy. So that's pretty much the consensus, that in order to get to zero emissions, those are the kinds of things that we'd really have to give up our fossil fuels. So that's a pretty tough ticket right now. Now, a lot of people don't understand greenhouse gases. We're pretty well understanding carbon dioxide, but in terms of what is really what is the greenhouse gas that warms our planet mostly, and that is water vapor in our atmosphere. And you can see 95 people may not realize this, but water vapor is a very major greenhouse gas. And relative to CO2, it's much more dominant. And I put a little note here that this is in the lower atmosphere. So I'm going to look at that in a sec. We're going to look at the upper atmosphere in a second. So water vapor is the most dominant greenhouse gas in our atmosphere. And it's a concern for what is called feedback. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So CO2 is the second most dominant, and it's what is increasing due to man. But water vapor is increasing as well because of feedback, a feedback problem. So we'll have to look at that. And methane is a very strong concern. Now, why do they say that methane is more potent? Well, because they feel that the atmosphere is more saturated with CO2. And you can see that if we increase CO2 in parts per million, there's not much change in the atmosphere that is occurring, where there's not much saturation, so to speak, on, say, methane. So an increase in methane would have more global warming potential, according to the scientists. So that's one of the main concerns, and they both have absorption areas that are different, so they don't overlap. But both methane and CO2 are overlap with water vapor, which is a stronger absorption. So in the lower atmosphere, water vapor dominates as far as a greenhouse gas. So this is the water vapor. And you can see it goes down to zero pretty much around 10,000 kilometers. So it's frozen out. And in the upper atmosphere, though, CO2 is still strong all the way up to 80,000 kilometers. So a lot of the climatologists point to that and they say, well, yeah, water vapor does dominate, but in the upper atmosphere, CO2 dominates. So it gets the last say about what radiation can go into outer space, and what radiation gets re-radiated back down to Earth. Now, I don't think this chart is exactly accurate. I think there is some fall off here in parts per million, but it gives you a good indication of the issue. That most of our atmosphere is related above 10,000 kilometers. Now, greenhouse gases do not supply heat. Greenhouse gases can only re-radiate heat, and they do so in all directions. So some of the heat comes back down to Earth, and some of it goes into outer space. So what percentage is that? So I wrote a paper because I wanted to, because the geek I am, I wrote a paper on this, and I found out that in 1950, the optimum re-radiation without any, if I said, consider 1950 as a period in time when there was no man-made problems from CO2. Now, that's not exactly true, but, and I found that the optimum re-radiation is about 62%. So, and that is optimum because it's the most efficient re-radiation that it can occur in the atmosphere. And about 1% has increased since then. Now, let me give you an idea. When solar radiation falls on the planet, this is called shortwave radiation, and it passes right through the greenhouse gases. But then it heats up the surface, and it's converted from that to long wave radiation, infrared, and that's what the greenhouse gases can absorb and re-radiate back down to Earth. So hotspots are, you can see where the hotspots come in the reflectivity of the planet and how it's related to greenhouse gases. So if you instead could take this hot surface and make it white, well, the solar radiation would not get converted to infrared, and the greenhouse gases would effectively do nothing. And what would you save? Well, you not only save the heat from the hotspot, but you also save the re-radiation that comes back, and that's about 62%. So it's about a 1.62 savings. So let me give you an indication. If you could think of your roof as like a 1,000-watt light bulb, it's emitting 1,000 watts of heat. Plus you get the greenhouse gas re-radiation. So now it's like a 1,620 watt light bulb. Now, to reverse that with greenhouse gases, you'd have to remove 1,620 watts from the atmosphere, or greenhouse gas equivalent. But to remove that with a reflectivity solution, you only have to remove 1,000 watts, because you get with that a loss of the re-radiation. So effectively, you're removing 1,620 watts. So I hope I'm not confusing you too much. Okay, let's talk about nature's feedback and see how we're doing. So global warming rise, as I said, in that period of time is about 1 degree centigrade. And some of this is caused by mankind, and some of this is caused by feedback from the Mother Nature getting up, giving feedback response to the warming. And like I said, the optimum re-radiation by the planet is about 62%. So when you get above that, the Earth has to do a lot of different finagling to try to get back to that, and you get all this feedback. So I estimated that man is causing between 40 and 50% of the what they call forcing. So forcing is what mankind is causing, and feedback is what nature is causing. So nature is responding and causing 50% to 60% of global warming. So most climatologists, I think, are using like 50-50 kind of split. So I'm using 60-40. I feel that the feedback is more dominant. So there's some good and bad in that, because if you if a little bit of reflectivity solution could reduce a lot of feedback also. So let's look at the way the Earth is responding. Well, we know a lot of us all are already aware of the Arctic ice melting. Now, when that happens, you have a loss of reflectivity, because the reflectivity of ice is somewhere, I forget what it is, but I think it's around 80%, and snow is pretty high. And when that melts and it goes into the ocean, well, the ocean reflectivity is pretty bad. It's somewhere around 5, or it's under 10%. So that's a big trade-off, and that's a lot of warming. So you have some feedback there, and the more warming you get, the more ice and snow that will increase, melting increase. So it's a circular feedback that is dangerous. Now the other big factor is water vapor. I showed you that water vapor is a dominant greenhouse gas. Well, most of us are aware that warm air, when you heat something, it expands. Like when you heat a metal, it expands. Well, you can think of it this way: the atmosphere, when you heat it, it will expand. And when that happens, you can put more water vapor into it. So you're increasing the water vapor because you have a bigger volume. And so some of that water vapor, it comes out of the rain budget, and it's hanging out in the atmosphere instead of in the rain budget. So that's the problem. And the more of that occurs, the more warmer the planet gets. And the warmer the planet gets, the more water vapor we get in the atmosphere. So that's another circular feedback that we have to be concerned about. So there's a plot of the humidity in the atmosphere. One of the things that I noticed is that you notice that this stops around 2015. And I don't really see as much research on global warming as that, in the prior yesteryear days. I haven't really seen an up-to-date graph on this. I'm sure it's hard to know if people are still following that. But climatologists are very aware of the fact that water vapor is probably the most dominant concern right now. And the second concern is the ice and snow melting. And there's other feedbacks like forest fires. Forest fires are a concern. Here's I have a video. You can go to this website, and they have a video, and you can see the water vapor in the atmosphere. It's a pretty cool thing from satellites. And it kind of shows you the water vapor over our planet. And sort of somehow they take away the clouds, and they just are able to show the water vapor on the planet. And you can see a lot of it is focused towards the southern hemisphere. So that's kind of interesting. And from a reflectivity solution, that's, we want to focus on areas that are in the southern hemisphere because those are hotter areas where there's more solar radiance. Okay, so this is the last portion of my talk. I hope I'm not boring you too much, but it's going to get worse now. So I'll talk about my research. So I have 5 papers that I'm trying to, I have 1 paper that I have published. So I had a lot of rejections. And so you basically I had to learn climatology language to get my papers accepted. So it wasn't that the physics was so wrong, it was just that my climatology language was off. So I'm now, I don't know, somewhat of a climatologist, which I don't want to really categorize myself that way, but anyway, I focused an awful lot on urban heat islands. And I have 2 papers on that. I have a paper on the re-radiation model. I have a paper on how much of the Earth do we have to kind of paint white for the solution. And I have a paper on these thermodynamic upper bounds on CO2 and methane. So my objective is that it's upsetting to me that climatologists are not more focused on reflectivity solutions. And if you look at the Paris Accord, there's not anything about reflectivity solutions other than cooling off urban heat islands for health reasons. And so I want to point to that. And I think that's like a huge mistake that is causing problems in progress. Now, my first paper that is now published looks at that, some of the controversy that has gone on. So let me start talking about urban heat islands a little bit. So how much do urban heat islands cause in global warming? How much? So I'm going to introduce to you what I call a footprint concept, and what I think is the reason why climatologists are not paying enough attention to urban heat islands. So you can kind of see how an urban heat island is kind of an island of heat here, in these 2 graphs, and they have some interesting characteristics. Of course, they're hotter during the daytime, but if you look at the difference in temperature between the rural area and the center of the city, it's actually a bigger delta. It's kind of an interesting characteristic at nighttime. But the important characteristic of urban heat islands is what I think is the footprint. And I think this is the main reason for the controversy between what I call IPCC authors and urban heat island authors. So IPC is the International Panel on Climate Change, and they are really a powerful organization of authors that reports on global warming. And IPC authors have claimed that less than 10% of global warming should be due to urban heat islands, where urban heat island authors are saying no way, is greater than 10%, and some authors have reported as much as 100%. So this is a little messy section here, but let me just skim through it. These authors started off the controversy by showing that 50% of global warming could be due to urban heat islands. There was pushback by the IPCC authors. They said that that was spurious, and they republished and said that's not true. So there was, the IPCC kept saying it's less than 10%. Some authors, a lot of authors have found around 30%. This author found 100% of global warming. So my research, I'm finding I have published 2 papers now on it. No, actually 1 paper, sorry. My 1 paper was 11 to 16%, and my second paper that I'm now publishing is up to 33% of global warming is due to urban heat islands. Now, my paper is the only paper with a reflectivity model. The other papers use measurements, ground-based measurements and correlations to try to figure out, how much of global warming is being contributed. So I did get a nice compliment by one of the reviewers that they thought my work contributed to the existing knowledge and debate on the relationship between urban heat islands and global warming. And notice I submitted that in May, and it took quite a long time to get published. So it's the peer review process is kind of very trying. Now, what is the reason for the controversy? My opinion is the footprint. If you look at urban heat islands, they're much more than just the area. If you look at the area of the urban heat islands, well, it doesn't look that big. But when you consider the tall buildings, the solar area is much bigger than the surface area. And I think therein lies some of the problems, because the solar area creates what I call as a footprint, where the heat extends outward into the rural areas. And that has been measured. So the footprint has actually been measured. Now, urban heat islands have a very small portion of the planet, about 0.4% of the Earth. And you need about, at least 2.5% to maybe cause significance. So the average Earth reflectivity is somewhere between 25 and 29%. And the average reflectivity of urban heat islands is, you can see, is very absorbing, is 12%, which is about a factor of 2, a little over a factor of 2 lower. Now, IBC authors are saying, well, global warming is probably around 5% from urban heat islands. However, they don't really recognize the footprint. Now, where does that come from? It's an amplification factor. There's a effective solar area from tall buildings. There's solar trapping, wind loss, cooling loss of natural cooling, and there's a humidity effect, which I talk about in my second paper. So you get an amplification of area 3 to 8 times. So now if you look at that 5% and you multiply it by 5, a factor of say 3 to a factor of 8, you get between 15 and 40% of global warming could be due to urban heat islands. And like I said, a lot of authors have reported, and there's a lot of authors. It's not just, 3 or 4 authors. Now, how do policies get made? So governments make policy on global warming. Policymakers are pretty much look to the Paris Accord. Policymakers base their knowledge on IPCC reports. So that International Panel on Climate Change dominates. So they are really a major obstacle, in my opinion, for the reflectivity solution. So here's my estimate on global warming currently between 33 and 45%. And this is the global warming feedback from sea ice, water vapor for that portion of global warming. So greenhouse gases. So these are the root causes. And as I mentioned, so if you consider that 50% is due to man, 45% is due to man. So of this 45%, you would get these proportions, and of the feedback, you would get these proportions. So those are the two estimates I have. Now, my second paper was on, when we talked about water vapor feedback in the atmosphere, climatologists recognizes that it's a major problem. Well, my second paper found that it's actually 2 times higher in urban heat islands in precipitous environments. So I took some measurements by some other authors, and I estimated that the feedback was a factor of 2 higher. So it's like a local greenhouse gas, because you have these hot surfaces that are causing water vapor, and you get that water vapor re-radiates back down in the urban heat island dome area, the heat. So you get more feedback, and urban heat islands are more of a major problem. My third paper talked about the re-radiation. It's kind of it basically showed what the optimum re-radiation would be for a perfect repeated capability of re-radiation percentages, and how that becomes out of balance with increasing warming. Now, basically, I found that 1950 was about 62%, and we talked about, that's increased to about close to 63%, that re-radiation factor. So it kind of explains the fact that if you increase the reflectivity of a hotspot, you reduce the greenhouse gas effect. So if you decrease the reflectivity of a hotspot, you increase the greenhouse gas effect. And that change is 1.62. So you can see that hotspots and greenhouse gas are interrelated. They affect each other. So this paper basically said, how much of the planet do we have to paint white to kind of cool it? And as I mentioned, you needed to reduce global warming by about 0.44%. And so I kind of looked at that and tried to figure out the area of the Earth, and I'm trying to publish the equations for that to make it friendly for people to do engineering and estimate appropriately the exact percentages that you need to make changes to, and also talked about the footprint factor that you might incorporate at certain areas of the Earth. So without the footprint, about 2.5% you'd have to change, and it depends on the radiance of the area and how much sunlight. That's why deserts are so good, because they receive a lot of sunlight, about 90%. Now, with the footprint, you might be able to get as low as 0.2%. I believe if urban heat islands were designed properly, we wouldn't have global warming issues. So reflectivity targets, you want to make sure that there are areas of high irradiance, low reflectivity that you can change to high reflectivity, and some ability to amplify nature. So I'm going to give an example of that. And like, for example, the Arctic ice, they're trying to amplify nature. They're putting some reflectivity on the young ice, and they're trying to increase the reflectivity of it, give it a chance to become old ice. So that amplifies the effect. So this gives you an idea of I don't know if this is a dumb idea or not, but I actually put it in one of my papers, so I hope people don't think it's too out of the ordinary. But I had this idea where LA is dumping like 100 million gallons a day of water into the storm drains, which ends up pretty much going into the ocean. And that's on a dry day. On a wet day, it's like about 10 billion gallons of water that goes into the ocean when it rains. What if we rerouted some of that water into Death Valley and irrigated it? I felt, well, 3,000 miles is not much in terms of the percent of the Earth. So you would not really change much in terms of global warming. But in terms of the area of California, it's 1.8%. And it probably has a pretty big footprint. So it might actually end up being about 9% effective area. And it could actually help to reduce the drought in LA and California and the forest fires. So that's another feedback. We would have less CO2. So that's just an idea that I had. And it kind of shows you that we need to be smarter. And we need to start thinking of some critical ideas. Now, just so people are concerned about forest fires, they're saying that it's not contributing that much in terms of fossil fuels. About 0.25% of the fossil fuels is from forest fires. So that was kind of a concern I had. So I don't know how accurate that is, but that's that was recently found that on the web. So fossil fuels are really the dominant thing. So my last paper is, I'm not as hopeful in getting this published, but I looked at things from a thermodynamic perspective. I looked at all the fossil fuels that were burned from 1950 all the way up to 2019. And I said, I know a lot about that time period. And I looked at the reactions, and I looked at the bond, what I call the bond enthalpy. So let me try to make this a little more easier to understand. Consider your space heater at home. Your space heater is, you put in a certain amount of electricity into it, a certain amount of power, and out comes heat. And the amount of heat is related, that it can put out, is related to how much it's rated for in wattage. So currently, I estimated that the available work in the atmosphere, just like a space heater, they use funny watts in climatology. They use watts per meter squared. I estimated it was about 2 watts per meter squared. And the IPC says, okay, yep, 1.8 watts per meter squared. So that number came out pretty good in my analysis. The number that didn't come out so good was the CO2 dissociation energy. It said that if you tried to actually do that much work in a year, the CO2 would dissociate. It's like trying to put too much electricity through your space heater, your elements would melt. So that was my estimate, that I came up with about 1 watt per meter squared, where the IPC is saying 1.8. So I'm saying that roughly they're overestimating the strength of CO2 by at least 50%. So that's like an upper bound estimate. So lastly, I'd like to talk about methane. Similarly, people are estimating the methane, because of that chart I showed you, it could be as the 20-year value could be 80 times more potent than CO2. Well, not so fast. Methane has a dissociation energy that is 1/2 of CO2. So if it tried to do that much work, the methane molecule would come apart. So I'm not in agreement with that. So let me wrap it up here. And so those are my papers, and for whatever they're worth, I've gotten involved in it, in this work. So suggestions in all my papers, pretty much, except I pretty much put on the end of it that we need to modify the Paris Accord to include reflectivity controls and solutions, especially in humid environments, where like cities that are in humid environments. We need to have reflectivity guidelines for urban heat islands. We need to organize the world funding for reflectivity solutions. I don't see that that's happening. We need a centralized effort in a single government agency like NASA to be responsible. And we need to have NASA step up and work on reflectivity solutions. In my opinion, I don't see the value of space exploration. I think they do an awful lot of good stuff. NASA, obviously, you know, we love our satellites and our GPSs and stuff like that. But I'd like to see them work, be funded, or use some of that funding for reflectivity solutions. And I think we could raise awareness if we required cars to be more reflective. I think everybody would become more aware and start using a better choice of colors. And we could also save energy by that in air conditioning in cars. So not a big contribution there, but raising awareness. So to summarize what I said is we need both CO2 reduction and reflectivity solutions. We need proper design for reflectivities in cities. The discrepancy, I think, between IPC and urban heat island authors is that footprint. Reflectivity solutions can reverse global warming. CO2 solutions, well, I really shouldn't have just said can only, but primarily right now they're showing that they can only slow down global warming. They won't reverse it. The main need is more wind, solar, and nuclear to reduce, to actually get to zero CO2. Okay, so CO2 may cause less warming. As my last paper showed, that CO2 may not be as causing as much warming as they're claiming. So it might be other reasons like urban heat islands. It's a very complex world we live in. Climate feedback is a major threat to our planet. So cooling hotspots, we have to do that because we're already having feedback. So there's no alternative. We really need reflectivity solutions. There's not nearly enough on reflectivity solution work on date. So my final conclusion is, I wanted to be a little uplifting, is reflectivity solutions exist to solve global warming. We need a separate climate accord for this sector and funding for all countries. So that's my talk. I hope you enjoyed it.
Alec, thank you very much. That was a lot of information. I'm glad we recorded it because I'm sure some folks would want to go back and take a look at it.
Yeah, I try to keep it to an hour, so a little bit, about 10 minutes past the hour.
That's okay. Yeah, there are 5 questions I see in the chat. If you can open
that's
the chat.
great.
Yeah, if you go to the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see the chat with the little 5 bubble over it, and you can open that up and read through them and answer those that you want to.
Yeah, my thing is not working. I'm not able to see that.
Well, let me see. Let me see if I
Let me
can.
see if I can. Can you like read them?
Yes. Hang on. Well, maybe. All right. First one is, as ice cap melts from global warming, doesn't reflectivity decrease, which increases warming? Circular problem. I think you answered.
Oh, okay. Was that the full question?
That was.
Yeah, we did discuss that. We did say that. So yes, that was one of the slides. That feedback is one of the issues, and I had a lot of information, so it's quite easy to miss it.
Well, and the question may have been asked
it was
before you went over
definitely
that feedback loop with a reflectivity.
would it reverse? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the question was asked, and the circular problem was a statement, I believe, before you had spoken to it in your presentation.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So just to make a final comment on that, I do believe that we could, when I say reverse global warming, we need feedback to follow. So I believe that is possible.
There is a question here that said, if everybody drove electric cars, would that reduce global warming?
Yeah, I'd like to see everybody drive. It would definitely reduce global warming because we know that CO2 is fossil fuels is the major contributor. And so we have to kind of look at what portion is done by industry and what portion is caused by transportation. So I think that is on the web. You can Google that. And I believe that electric cars are definitely, again, you have to charge up your car. So that electricity has to come from green sources, so renewables. So again, there's a qualifier in there. So if everybody drove electric cars, and that if they were recharged, you recharged your battery with renewable energy, yes, that would go a long way. And you still have to, it would not solve global warming because I believe there is that other reason that urban heat islands are a cause of global warming as well. But it would probably solve about 60 to 70% of global warming.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, if CO2 concentration decreases, would that allow the methane to increase?
No, they're in different portions of the absorption spectrum. So they don't interfere with each other. They're not, there's a places where the CO2 absorbs and re-radiates on the infrared spectrum. So it's just like when you put light through a prism. Infrared has many frequencies, and the absorption area of CO2 is different from the absorption area of methane. So but in the lower atmosphere, water vapor does dominate and interfere with those absorption areas, but in the upper atmosphere, methane and CO2 would be able to irradiate independently.
Is Rebecca still on? You can unmute if you're there, Rebecca.
Yeah, Alec, I sent you some questions specifically just to you, not realizing that you weren't able to see them. So I was hoping to be able to ask at least a couple of them if possible.
Sure.
One of them was, aren't monocrops a huge issue with carbon retention in the soil? In other words, like with the GMO crops, don't they tend to destroy soil health more than the varied crops?
Yeah, that's a complicated question because I didn't really understand what you're talking about. What is the crop issue?
Monocrops, like the single GMO monocrops that deplete, don't they tend to deplete the soil more than varied crops, and therefore the soil does not hold carbon as well?
It might very well be true. I don't know, Rebecca. That's not my area of expertise, but it's an interesting question.
Okay. And my other one was, does using solar panels on roof help contain heat, and would their efficacy of capturing heat decline if there were like more reflective roofs, like white roofs?
They actually have white solar cells, different color solar cells.
Oh.
And I think that would, I'm a big proponent of that because I don't like the black, but believe it or not, solar cells, when they start making, I've looked into it, and when they start, if they're not generating electricity, they are creating a lot of heat. But when they start generating electricity, they throw off less heat, so that they become a little more reflective in some ways.
Okay. And the very, very last question I had, if you don't mind, is you're talking about irrigating hotspots like Death Valley. Would that contribute to more water vapor and kind of contribute to the problem, or like how does that work?
I think that's a good question, and I think I think once you irrigate it, that it would be beneficial. But yeah, there is a risk because it's hot and you're putting water vapor in the atmosphere. So I think if you could cool it faster than not, it might be more helpful. So maybe drown it for a while. Then it would stop the evaporation. And natural cooling is king. So once it's in the soil and you have natural cooling, that water vapor is you could grow things, and it would be more contributing to the rain budget.
Thank you. It was a great presentation. I hope you can send us all a copy.
Oh yeah, this presentation was recorded and it will be posted for folks to take a look at.
Yeah, if you need the slides, just send me an email or John or somebody, and he'll let me know, and I'll try to post the slides somewhere.
Thank you all for joining. Alec, thank you so much. This was really cool. I thought it was cool. Very, very interesting topic, and I really appreciate your time in putting it together and presenting it to us tonight.